pipeline anyway? Let's start by making a short analogy to an assembly line needed to build a car. I will oversimplify this to only 3 stages of production. The first one would be to bring the chassis for the car. Then on top of the chassis, we can mount the engine. And finally, we can put the body of the car. Even from this very simple example, you can notice a few aspects. First of all, there is a series of steps that need to be done in a particular order. And the second of all is that the steps are connected. You can say that the output from the previous step is the input for the next step. In software development, a pipeline is a chain of processing components organized so that the output of one component is the input of the next component. At the most basic level, a component is a command that does a particular task. The goal is to automate the entire process and to eliminate any human interaction. Repetitive tasks cost valuable time, and often a machine can do repetitive tasks much faster and more accurately than a human can do. In this video, we're going to build a pipeline using Jenkins. But first of all, what is Jenkins? Jenkins is an automation tool, and it helps to automatically execute any pipelines that we define, no matter how complex. Jenkins helps to automatically build, test, and deploy software without any human interaction, but we will get into that a bit later. If you don't have Jenkins already installed, make sure that you check the video description for an installation guide. Now that we have Jenkins up and running, let's go ahead and create a new job in Jenkins. A job is a task or a set of tasks that run in a particular order. We want Jenkins to automatically execute the task or tasks and to save the result to keep a record of it. You can view a job as something we assign Jenkins to do on our behalf. In order to create a job, you can either go to create new jobs here in case you don't have any other jobs in Jenkins, or from the left panel you can click on new item, which basically will create a new job. We're going to name this job car assembly. And from all the options listed below, I'm going to select pipeline. The next thing that you will see is the job configuration page. And this is where we configure the job and tell Jenkins what to do, because otherwise Jenkins will have no idea what exactly we expect with this pipeline. At first, this may look very scary and long, and you probably have no idea what to do next. Don't worry, I will take you through the process step by step. Scroll to the lower part of the page until you reach a part called pipeline. This is where we can start defining our pipeline. We will start with a quick example. On the right side of the editor, you will find this select box. From there, simply select Hello World. You will notice that some code was generated for you. This is a straightforward pipeline, and it only has one stage called Hello. And inside this stage, you will find a single step using the command echo, which will display a message, Hello World. Let's click on Save and return to the main job page. So far nothing has happened. We have configured the pipeline and we have saved this configuration, but the pipeline has not been executed yet. From the left side panel, click on Build Now in order to start running the pipeline. You will see that the execution only takes a few seconds. When Jenkins will start running the job, it will read the configuration and begin executing the steps configured in the pipeline. Once the execution is done, you should see something similar to this. You will be able to see here the stage called Hello, but you will not be able to see the Hello World message that we have printed from the job configuration. A green colored stage will indicate that the execution was successful and no errors were encountered. In order to view the Hello World message, we have to view the console output. This is where Jenkins records everything that is happening during the execution. In order to do that, you can click here on the build number, which in this case is 1. And after that, from the left side menu, you can click on Console Output. Notice that the text Hello World was displayed after executing the command echo Hello World. Congratulations! You have just configured and executed your first pipeline in Jenkins. Next, let's quickly discuss how a typical pipeline or a typical build process can look like. When building software, we usually go through several stages. While there is no hard rule, most commonly they are build, test, and publish. Build is the main step and does the automation work required in order to build something. The test stage ensures that the build step was successful and that the output is as expected. And finally, publish. If the test stage is successful, this saves the output of the build job for later use or sends it somewhere for publishing. We will create a simple car assembly pipeline, but only using folders, files, and text. We try to keep it as simple as possible to make sure that you understand the concepts behind them. So this is what we want to do in our pipeline. In the build stage, we're going to create a build folder. Inside the build folder, we're going to create an empty car.txt file. And then we're going to add the words chassis, engine, and body to the car.txt file. In the test stage, we're going to check if the car.txt file exists in the build folder. Additionally, we're going to look for the words chassis, engine, and body to see if they are present inside the file. Finally, in the publish stage, we're going to save the contents of the build folder as a zip file for later use. Let's go back to the car assembly job configuration page and start implementing the pipeline. Please note that the following steps require that you have Jenkins installed on a Unix-like system. Alternatively, if you're running Windows, make sure that Jenkins has access to some Unix utilities as described in the installation guide present in the video description. In order to configure the pipeline, I will have to go to Configure in the left side panel and go to the bottom of the page to the pipeline configuration. The first thing that we will do is to rename the stage from Hello to Build. Next, we're going to use a pipeline step called sh, which will help us execute a given shell command. So the first thing is to use the command make directory and to create a directory called build. The next step would be to create an empty file and to put that inside the build folder. I'm going to use the touch command in order to do that because touch will create an empty file if it doesn't exist already. We're going to make sure that we put it within the build folder. Finally, we want to put the word chassis inside the file. We're going to use echo for that. And with the greater than operator, we're going to put this directly into the car.txt file. Let's save and execute the pipeline. It seems that the pipeline is successful again. So let's go ahead and inspect the console to see if there are any errors or what happened there. Just by inspecting the console, we can just notice that there were no errors, that the pipeline finished successfully. But how do we know if this file and this folder were actually created successfully? In order to do that, we have to go to the left side panel and click on Workspaces. We're going to click here on the path displayed here. And we will see the build folder and the car.txt file within the build folder. Now let's take a look at how we can add the test stage. In the previous step, we have manually checked that the folder and the file were created. As we want to automate the process, it makes sense to write a test that will check if the file was created and has the expected contents. So let's go ahead and create a test stage. So under stages, we're gonna add a new stage called test. And within the stage test, we're going to define multiple steps. The first step would be to test if the file was created. We're going to use the test command combined with the F flag that allows us to test if a file exists. If the file exists, then it makes sense to check if the contents of the file is correct. The grep command will enable us to search the contents of a file for a specific string. So the grep command expects that we first give the string that we're looking for, in this case is chassis, and second of all that we tell grep where to search for it. In our case, we're going to search inside build/car.txt because this is the path where we have created a file. So let's save and run it again. Now you will notice that the pipeline has two stages, build and test, but you probably can tell from the red color that something did not went well. So what happened here? You see, each command that we execute is expected to return an exit code. It is a way for the command to tell, hey, everything was okay, or hey, no, I had some issues and you should know about them. The exit code tells Jenkins if the command was successful or not. This is how programs and computers work. If the exit code is 0, it means that the command was successful. If the exit code is not 0, the command had an error during the execution. We want to stop the execution of the pipeline as soon as one of the commands that we have executed reports back an error. This is to prevent future steps from running and propagating the error to the next stages. Now, in order to understand what exactly happened and why the build failed, we need to check the console output. It's always important to have a bit of patience and to read the entire console to understand what the job did and where exactly the error originated. In this case, it's quite easy. We have executed the command make_dir build, and make_dir reported back cannot create directory build file exists. This error happens because the previous execution of the pipeline already created a folder named build. So when instructing Jenkins to create the build folder again, it will say, hey, you already have a build folder. There's something wrong, and I will stop. And you will see nothing happens after this. Every Jenkins job has a workspace folder allocated on the disk for any files that are needed or generated during the job execution. While each Jenkins job uses this workspace, each job execution will reuse the workspace. So meaning we are now at the third job execution, the workspace is the same as it has been left by the previous job execution. This is why the error occurs. In order to fix the pipeline, we need to remove the existing build folder before creating a new one. This will ensure that we start with a fresh build folder that doesn't contain anything else. So before trying to create a new folder, let's first delete it, just to make sure that it doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to use remove for that, rm. And now that we have adapted our pipeline, let's save it and run it again. Now we have a pipeline that has a build stage and a test stage. Since the tests are successful, this is something that we may want to keep. So let's add a publish job to save this data that we have generated. As you remember, we remove the build folder every time we start the pipeline again. So it doesn't make any sense to keep anything in the workspace of the job. The job workspace is only for temporary purposes during the execution of the pipeline. Jenkins provides us a way to save the build result using a build step called archive artifacts. You probably heard the term artifact so far, and if you haven't, don't worry, I will try to quickly explain it. In archaeology, an artifact is something made or given shape by humans. In simpler terms, it is an object. In our case, the artifact is the build folder containing the car.txt file, because this is something that we have created. So let's go back to the job configuration and add the final stage. So the stage will be called publish. And this will contain a single step. And the step will be archive artifacts. I'm going to specify the path to the artifacts, which is actually the contents of the build folder. Let's save and rerun the pipeline. Because we have added a new stage, the pipeline will have now 3 stages, and it seems that everything worked well. Typically, it takes Jenkins a bit to show the last artifact, so I'm going to refresh the page. And now you will see here right on top, it appears last successful artifact. And you will see that this is the artifact of the car assembly pipeline. This comes from the build number 5. And if you go inside it, you'll be able to see the car.txt file. It's pretty similar, you might think, with the workspaces, but the artifact ensures that this will be saved and we can easily check which is the artifact that has been generated by the specific job run. If you remember, we have only added one part of the car, the chassis, but we have forgotten to add the engine and the body. So let's go back to the configuration page and to the test stage and adapt the pipeline. So let's add the engine and the body. In addition, you're going to adapt the test as well to search for the engine and the body. Let's save and rerun, and hopefully everything will work fine. Unfortunately, rerunning the pipeline will fail and will get an error. So let's go to the console and inspect what has happened. You will see here the last command that was executed was searching for the word chassis within the build car.txt. So you're probably wondering what has happened here. So let's go back to the file and inspect what is wrong with the file. The reason for the error is that the car.txt file now only contains the word body. Good that we have written a test for that. But how did it happen? Let's go back to the configuration page. The greater than operator will replace the content of the file, the entire content of the file, and we don't want that. For that reason, the last command that was executed, body, this replaced whatever was previously inside the file. But we don't want that. We will use the greater than operator to just append the text to the file. Now the pipeline is successful again, and we are confident that our artifact, in this case the car.txt file, has the right content. If you remember, at the beginning of the tutorial, you were asked to select the type of job you want to create. Historically in Jenkins, many jobs were and still are configured manually, with different checkboxes, text fields, and so on. But what we did was something different. We call this approach pipeline as code. While it is not apparent, we have used a domain-specific language, DSL, which has its foundation in the Groovy scripting language. So this is the code that defines the pipeline. As you can observe, even for a relatively simple scenario, the pipeline is starting to grow in size and becomes harder to manage. Also, configuring the pipeline directly in Jenkins is cumbersome without a proper text editor, because you can easily make mistakes and not notice them until you run the pipeline. Moreover, any work colleagues with a Jenkins account can modify the pipeline, can add or remove things to it. If the pipeline fails, you will not know exactly what has changed and why the pipeline is failing all of a sudden. There must be a better way, and I can assure you there is. In order to fix this, we will create a new Git repository on github.com. If you don't already have a GitHub account, it's free and easy to create one. I'm already logged in into mine, so I will go here on the right side and create a new repository. I'll name my repository car assembly so that I know what it is, and I will let this public as this will make the authentication simpler. The next step would be to create a new file. We'll name this file Jenkins file, as this is the standard convention for naming the file which contains the Jenkins pipeline. I'll go back to the job configuration, copy the entire contents, and put it inside the Jenkins file. Once the file is in the repository, I can simply click here on Use HTTPS to get the address to the repository, copy it, and go back to Jenkins. We need to tell Jenkins to read the pipeline configuration from Git. The next step is to select, instead of pipeline script from SCM. And by the way, SCM stands for Source Code Management. The source code management that we will use in this case is Git. And at the repository URL, I will paste what I have copied from GitHub. I will save and run the pipeline again. As you can notice, an additional stage has been added, check out SCM, and all it does is to check out the Git repository that we have specified and to read the Jenkins file. So now we use Git to store the pipeline configuration in the file called Jenkins file. This allows us to use any text editing software to change the pipeline, but we can also keep track of any changes that happen to the configuration. In case something doesn't work after making a Jenkins configuration change, we can quickly revert to the previous version. Typically, the Jenkins file will be stored in the same Git repository as the project we are trying to build, test, and release. As a best practice, we always store code in an SCM system. Our pipeline belongs there as well, as it is code, and only then we can really say that we have pipeline as code. I hope this quick introduction to Jenkins and pipelines has helped you understand what a pipeline is, what are the most typical stages, and how Jenkins can help automate the build and test process and ultimately deliver more value to your users faster. For your reference, you will find a link to the GitHub repository in this video description, as well as additional resources mentioned throughout the video.